I used to live with the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. Hector was this 6-foot Afro-Latino dude from New Jersey who had two distinct modes of being. Either he was a tornado of anger, or he was manically laughing at something. Rarely was there any in between. When you caught him in his laughing mood, he was tolerable at best, but catch him in one of his angry moods and he was totally unbearable. He was a roadie for some post-hardcore band that toured up and down the East Coast a bunch, which was one of the few good things about being his roommate. The fact that he spent weeks away at a time from the apartment but still paid rent. But whenever he was home, well, here's an example. It's July in East Harlem. I have the windows open. Latin brass band music is flowing through the afternoon air from some other open window, and I'm sipping Southern Peach lemonade like life is good. Out of nowhere, Hector bursts into the apartment, covered in brick dust like, "I need bricks, bro. You got bricks?" I just started driving Uber while trying to get my stand-up career up and running, so no, I didn't have any bricks. And even if I did, I wouldn't have been sharing them with Hector. And suddenly he's like, "There's bricks on the roof." And as he runs out of the apartment and towards the stairwell of the building, I hear these kids shouting from outside the window. Then I look out to see this group of kids, like 11-year-old kids, all shouting stuff in Spanish at our building. They see me, start flipping me off and whatnot before they suddenly scatter in all directions. Then bam, a brick lands right in the spot where they were before they scattered. See, that's the type of guy Hector was. He could go out for a pack of rips and find himself in a brick fight with a bunch of Puerto Rican kids on the way back. Never in my life have I ever had a fight with a preteen, let alone one involving projectiles. But around Hector, that stuff was like a daily occurrence. So come that October, Hector is headed out on some big Halloween tour with one of his bands, and he tells me he won't be back till the second week of November. That meant I'd have to cover half of the rent until then, something I'd have to borrow money to do. This causes a big fight, and for the first time since I moved in, I thought Hector might actually hit me. And being the kind of guy that he was, I knew for a fact that if it came to violence, he wouldn't just stop at one punch. So when the time came for him to go on tour, the mood in the apartment isn't just at its low point. I'm legit scared for my physical safety. He leaves, I'm looking for a new apartment, and life is not so good anymore. So a few nights later, the night before Halloween actually, I'm sitting in the little kitchen area, eating arepas and looking for other apartments. Someone buzzes the apartment, so I go to see who it is. This is back when we had intercoms, but they sucked and barely worked half the time, so when I hear some guy with an accent says something like, "I need an apartment number 3, but the buzzer's not working," I just buzz the guy in without a second thought. New York is a city built on takeout, delivery, and street food, so I'm hardly going to be all suspicious over a delivery driver. But I should have been, and I almost paid with my life for it. Those guys busted our front door open like it was nothing, just smashed the lock right through with a sledgehammer. I actually thought it was the cops at first because they just piled in, guns drawn, shouting, "Get on the floor, get down." But then the way that they were talking to each other once I was lying face down on the linoleum, that clued me into the fact that they were just stick-up guys. But what were they doing in my apartment? My first thought was, Jesus Christ, Hector, whose toes did you step on now? But before I can wonder anymore, one of the guys starts asking me, "Where is it? Where is it?" I'm like, "Where's what?" But that just makes them mad. I get this flurry of kicks that have me balled up in the fetal position, then they ask me again. I can't tell them anything else, so I just say, I don't know what you're talking about. There's $20 in my wallet, that's all I got on me." The offer of $20 just offended them, and I get more kicks before they start tossing the apartment like they're looking for something. And when I say tossing, I really do mean trashing. They're deliberately breaking stuff, pulling drawers all the way out and then throwing them at other stuff. It was just destruction in every sense of the word, and it was around then that I got a look at a couple of the guys. They're all masked up or have stuff over their faces. They're wearing all black, gloves and the works. They were professional stick-up guys, probably robbed drug dealers for a living, but Hector wasn't dealing. I mean, I think I'd have noticed at some point. I saw a lot of broken guitars and amplifiers around the apartment, but not too many piles of coke or money. Then right as I'm about to think it, one of the guys comes out with it. "You sure this is the right place, man?" I don't know. Homie told me he keeps it behind the bathtub sometimes, but these people only got a shower in there." I feel this wave of relief washing over me. They got the wrong place, so they're gonna just walk out, right? Maybe take my phone so I can't call the cops. So, like I said, I told them my phone was on the table, next to my food, and that I wouldn't call the cops if they just left. Cuck move, maybe, but it's amazing how zen you get about material possessions when you see a Glock in someone's hand. The stick-up guys kind of pause and look at each other. Then right as I think they're about to just leave, one of them says, "I think you see my face, man, when we were breaking in. He's gotta go." One of them has the gun, and the guy who wants me dead starts reaching to take it off the guy who has it, but the guy who has it doesn't want to give it up. That was my cue to soil myself and start begging for my life. It wasn't my proudest moment, and peeing my pants was by no means metaphorical, but it is what it is looking back. They're arguing over shooting me. I'm begging for my life. It's just chaos and them shouting in there, and I'm amazed no one had called the cops already. But then boom, the front entrance of the apartment building slams shut, and I can hear a very familiar voice coming up the stairs. I'm not even going to type out what Hector was saying. I'd be canceled and deleted from the internet within seconds after posting, but let's just say someone had canceled their tour 3 days in, and he was livid about it, going on calling them every name under the sun, ranting and raving as he pounded his way up the stairs, and in the apartment, both me and the stick-up guys are about frozen in anticipation. Then right as Hector is about to come into the apartment, he says something like, "Hey, I got your money, you whiny little baby. What the The guy with the gun aims it at Hector as he walks in, looking around at the pure destruction that greeted him. "Who are you people?" he screamed. "Who are you?" the guy with the gun screamed back. Hector is just gone by this point, foaming at the mouth, looking like he's got one of his eyeballs about to pop when he comes back. "I live here!" Then, I swear to God, I watch as Hector basically turns into a drunk, slightly overweight Jason Bourne. He swings his backpack off his shoulder and just launches it at the shooter. He knocks the guy slightly off balance, messes up his aim, but by the time he can rearrange himself, Hector football tackles this guy onto the carpet and just starts wailing on him. The 2 other guys then jump in, and I'm thinking, oh Jesus God, someone's about to get shot. When out of nowhere, Hector comes up and is just windmailing punches at both guys, holding his own until he goes down again. Then almost immediately, both guys start backing up, hands in the air, and there's Hector, holding the gun he'd almost just been shot with, telling both the guys to back up. His face is bleeding. He's totally gassed, but there he is, having just won a freaking fistfight with 3 guys, one of them armed. He then sits on the KO'd shooter's back, tells the other guys to get out of his apartment, and tells me to dial 911. And only when the cops show up to arrest the guy he'd managed to detain did he realize he'd been stabbed in the shoulder. That night, as he got stitched up at the hospital, I sifted through all the broken and non-broken stuff, swept up all the broken glass and ceramics, and generally tried to put the apartment back in order. He got back at around 1 a.m., still drunk after the doctor told him, "Do not drink on these painkillers," and immediately started complaining about the break-in. I just carried on cleaning up, stopping only briefly to say something deeply heartfelt. "Hector, dude, I just wanted to say I think you might have saved my life today, dude, and I just wanted to say thank you." I felt my throat kind of tighten as I said it, very similar to the way it's doing now as I'm typing this, remembering. Hector looked up at me, with this look in his eyes that almost made it look like I'd gotten through to him, until he replied with, "Whatever, You could have jumped in at any time. I didn't mind. I knew Hector well enough by that point to know he wasn't exactly in touch with his feelings. But as he immediately sought to leave the room due to the uncomfortable amount of emotion in the air, he turned and said, "Did you see the look on those guys' faces, though? It's hilarious, dude." And he just walked off to his bedroom, laughing that evil toddler laugh that makes my skin crawl, even today. You see, for just over a year I shared an apartment with the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. And I owe that idiot my life. Please, New York, don't ever change.
Oh boy, does it give me shivers to this day. For a little background, my grandma lives in a house that she inherited from her aunt, my great-aunt, after she died, and it's a beautiful secluded area along the Irish coast that is half an hour away from a city and within a lush green ivy forest by the sea. Proper Celtic fairy tale stuff, right? Oh, except she lives around some absolute nutjobs as well. One of them was a dysfunctional family that lives in a stone cottage across from our house. I only loosely know about what happened and why they were living there, but basically the dad was abusive. And before I was born, the eldest son got sent to prison for repeatedly raping the daughter. She took him to court with DNA evidence, but that's a different scandal. The youngest son, who I'll call CN for creepy neighbour, never went to school and is supposedly mentally impaired. Before I continue with this story, I want to clarify that CN was also probably abused growing up, and although it is very unlikely, I hope he gets the help and care that he needs one day, because from what I have heard, he is a danger to himself and others. Now, on with the story. It began on a summer's day, when my twin sister and I were about 6 years old, and we were staying at our grandma's house for the summer and playing on her lawn near the gateposts into her driveway, while she and our parents were inside preparing lunch. CN, who was still a young man and would always hang around and enter neighbours' gardens without permission to say hello, was the mental age of a 7-year-old, and he just didn't understand boundaries and was creeping people out. He saw us both playing and came into the garden to talk to us. I can't remember if we learned about stranger danger at that point, but we assumed that he was one of my grandma's friends and both talked to him just to be polite. My concentration as a child was terrible, and CN slurred his words as he rambled on. Like I mentioned, he was illiterate, and asked us questions such as if we liked the new t-shirt he was wearing. But then he started talking about his willy. I zoned out of the conversation up until this point. Hearing that word suddenly made my gut alert, because not long before my mum explained to me about how boys and girls have different sex organs in a way that I could understand, and how it was important that they were kept private. My sister and I stood silently as CN continued talking to us about his equipment. I am not sure how my sister was feeling or if she knew how to react, but I felt myself growing more and more uncomfortable the longer he stayed and talked, and was beginning to wonder if I should go into the house to get my grandma. Then CN asked, "Do you want to see my willy?" My cheeks and stomach were burning with shame at this point, while my sister squeaked, "Yeah," probably not knowing how to react either. My head was screaming, "What on earth are you doing? Why did you say yes?" Then I heard CN unzip, and I clenched my eyes shut and looked away while my ears listened for when he'd zipped himself back up again. I don't remember much after that, except a few minutes later, my grandma came out to the lawn, Mum and Dad in tow, and she calmly told my sister and I to go inside. Apparently Grandma then proceeded to ask CN what he was talking about to us, and he told her that he was talking about lorries. But eventually she got the truth out of him. Later that day she called the police, and when an officer arrived he took a statement from my twin sister and scribbled down her account of what had happened. That night my dad went to the stone cottage accompanied by police and a family friend, who I will call good neighbour, GN. CN was scared of GN, because GN once punched him for coming up to his farm at night and frightening his daughters. So with backup, my dad knocked on the door, asked for CN and threatened to kill him if he ever came into my grandma's garden again. For the record, my dad is a pacifist that doesn't tolerate violence or confrontation, but this incident understandably made him very angry and upset. When I was at my grandma's house after that, the adults always kept a close eye on us from then on. They wouldn't let us go out alone, and understandably would get very mad if we disappeared. When we were old enough to be allowed to go out for walks alone, we were told to run back to Grandma's house if we ever saw CN and tell him. We're telling our dad if he tried talking to us. Thankfully, my parents would always usher us away if they did see him, or tell him to keep away. My grandma still gives him a Christmas card every year, but this incident really upset her, and she stopped allowing him into her garden after it happened. It must have been difficult for my parents to keep us both calm and help us understand that it wasn't our fault, but CN for being a very rude man. Nonetheless, avoiding CN in the neighbourhood always added a sense of adventure to the summer holidays. But as I grew up to understand what was going on and what happened to that family, it was a bit of a shock, and I still get unsettled thinking about it now. I'm so thankful that my gut told me to look away that day, because if I did see anything, then I probably would have been much more scarred for life than I am now. I wanted to tell you guys about my mentally unstable neighbour, who I will be calling Kay to respect her privacy. Because I don't want to call her crazy or anything else that contributes to the stigmatism of severe mental illness, this story isn't going to be exaggerated to be more creepy than what it was. It's just what happened. Now, we had just moved into our new home, which we had recently built in a town in Texas. It started when my parents began finding small pills strewn about our backyard near the fences, just a few here and there. We googled the numbers on the pills to find most of them were antidepressants, but I can't remember the exact names, as this was about a year ago or so. But I think there was at least one pill that Google said was an antipsychotic medication. We were pretty confused, but mostly worried about our dog eating them before we could find them all. This kept happening over a few weeks, and then we found unopened water and Gatorade bottles thrown over our fence. The side of the house this was coming from had a somewhat empty lot next door. We had soon-to-be neighbours building their new house there, but it wasn't like the construction workers were throwing their trash over our fence. These bottles were unopened and full. For reference, Kay lives a few houses down from mine on the corner. Between our house and hers are two empty lots, the lot closest to us with a new house being built. After another week or so of this came the fights, or maybe incidents I should call them. Kay would routinely storm out of her house and go yell at the construction workers. I don't know what about, but apparently about nonsense things. Sometimes she would yell from her yard, sometimes she would walk onto the lot to yell. Several times she was seen yelling at no one, just standing in the lot or walking around the construction supplies and arguing to herself. By now, most of the people on our street knew her and were afraid of her. Up to this point, I have never seen Kay. I attended university an hour away and was only home on the weekends. One weekend, my parents left me home alone in the middle of the day. I think they were at the gym or the grocery store. I'm an only child too, and I had just gotten out of the shower and walked downstairs to hear yelling. I took a look out the windows to see a middle-aged blonde lady arguing. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I couldn't hear another male voice. Now, I had not met Kay yet, but I also hadn't met my new neighbours. So my first thought was that this was the new couple building next door, my new neighbours. It seemed like they were arguing about the house. After a few minutes, the blonde lady walked away, and then a couple came out of the unfinished house. They got into their car and parked on the street. I was really confused at this point, especially when the man walked over to my door and rang the doorbell. I'm very introverted, so I opted not to answer the door. Stupid, I know. My parents weren't home anyway, so it wouldn't have made a difference, I thought. After a minute, he walked back to his car, and from the window I could see he was sitting there on the driver's side doing something. He came back with a note that he left on my door, and then he and his wife drove away. After I was sure they were gone, I got the note and read it. Apparently my neighbours were checking out the house when they saw Kay, the blonde lady, attempting to get into my backyard. They confronted her, and that's what the yelling was. In a rush, I sent a picture of the note to my mum and called her, etc., but she didn't seem that worried about it. I knew that we always left the back door unlocked during the day, though. If she had gotten through our fence gates, she could have easily walked inside the house while I was home alone. After that, my stepdad got some new locks for the little gate doors at the front of our house. Things continued like this for a while, with Kay trying to get into our backyard, throwing pills and water bottles over our fence. A couple of times she was rummaging around our front flower beds too. And there was one instance which really unnerved my parents. We have a small alleyway that runs behind our house, connecting everyone's driveways. And another neighbour, who lives across the alleyway from us, contacted my parents to let them know they had seen Kay looming around our back fence at 3 a.m. that night. Not sure why those neighbours were awake at that time, but they said Kay was just standing there in the middle of the alleyway, staring at our back fence. Knowing we had someone essentially casing our house in the middle of the night, it was really starting to freak us out. The guy who built our house, who I'm naming Jay, somehow got in contact with someone who knew Kay's family pretty well. Everyone was wanting answers as to why Kay was acting like this, and since Jay had built most of the houses in the area and was well connected, people were asking him. I think he was friends with the realtor who sold the house to Kay, but I'm not sure. But Jay was able to give us a lot of information about her. Apparently her family was rich and owned a very big corporation, like one of the biggest in the US, and her family had essentially placed her in this house away from the rest of them, as they didn't want to deal with her mental illnesses. But more importantly, 2 years ago, her only son died of a drug overdose, and she's been unstable ever since. I'm not sure if she thinks we're holding him hostage, or his ghost is here or what. But that's why. She's been to several psychiatric hospitals throughout her life, and now she's stopped taking her medication because she's throwing it over our fence. Things finally came to a head in January of 2020, when during one of her usual arguments with the construction workers, she pulled out a BB gun. She was already very aggressive, so the BB gun just made things 100 times worse. I don't know if she just threatened to shoot them or if she actually did, but the cops were called regardless. It took them a while to talk her down, with several police officers swarming the street with big guns. I'm thankful that my parents had been filing police reports, so when they came they knew about Kay's history of mental illness. I'm both grateful and a little surprised that they handled the situation so well, because not a lot of police departments properly train their officers to deal with mentally ill patients, especially ones experiencing psychosis. Anyway, after that incident, Kay was not seen for a long time. We heard she was in a psychiatric hospital for many months, after which she returned to our neighborhood. She's doing much better now. She no longer does any of the strange behaviors she used to, and almost every day, me and my parents see her walk her dog past our house. She's clearly sticking to her routine, and I'm happy for her.